Well, hello again, and welcome to Unit 6. I hope your week has gone well. It's been great to see your activity in the class so far this week in the forums. Hope you're enjoying the content. Lots of great learning and discussion. One of the things that I find in these chapters that's especially applicable is I oftentimes hear from students who have past experience in the technological realm or the online assessments. They've completed some of the assessments before. I talk to people who are in certain classes, and I ask them what they're doing, and they're saying, "Oh, I took the MBTI," and I say, "Well, did you take the formalized Myers-Briggs type indicator, or did you take the free one online, which I think is the one that I give you in this class?" And they always say, "Oh, I took the free one," which has some great truth to it. But what's interesting is when I proceed to talk through these conversations with clients or with just colleagues, friends, students, and I begin to unpack what is this MBTI, or what are these assessments really saying? Like, not just what are you think what they're saying, but what are they really saying? And then we unpack that together, and they go, "Oh, I had no idea." I met with a client last week, and we have another upcoming session this week, and we talked about that very thing and the interpretation, the actual interpretation of the results. And this client for years and years had been under the impression, even in taking a class where they had looked at some of these assessments, that the results communicated said various things. And in our 1 hour time frame together, I communicated very clearly that actually what her results were saying were very, very different than what had been communicated in the past by way of just reading a quick result online or something like that. So I love to hear what students in the past, and I'm sure students in the future, will say about online assessments and technology and teleconferencing and counseling and all that, and what that actually has to offer the client, and then what perhaps is still lacking in those conversations. So you can see I'm in a kind of a different change of scenery. I'm in a different room in my home, and I'm showing you this because this room that I'm in right now is where my wife homeschools our children. So I don't know if I've mentioned that before, but we homeschool all of our 4 children. Well, really only the 2 that are in school, the 7.5 and 6-year-old, so second and first grade. And we have this room, and they all have their own desks. And here's the reason why I'm telling you about this. I'm telling you about this homeschooling approach that we take to schooling our children, and showing you kind of in a little bit anyway the room, because I want you to understand a lot of the reason why I again teach this class the way that I do, why I've approached it in the setup as I have, and why we have these certain assignments. And a lot of it has to do, as I've mentioned previously, is I like to look at things differently. And actually, it's interesting. I talk with my wife quite a bit about our kids' education, as you would probably expect that I would, as we have our children at home. And I hear from her kind of the way that our students, our kids, really engage in this kind of alternative educational format. So obviously there's four children that we have, and they're in this home classroom, and they're learning kind of all together at different levels. But one of the things that we're really trying to do is speak to the needs that they have at this moment. So as opposed to saying that here's the I guess the standardized ways of doing certain things. I saw this great little, what is it called, a meme, one of those pictures that has the funny things on it with words, and this wasn't really a funny one, but it was a truth. It said, the strange thing about standardized tests is that they don't really work because there's no such thing as a standardized mind. And I think that that's the case with education, both at the K through 12 level, but also once you get to college, and especially at the graduate level. But then I think about, too, the work that you are in or you're pursuing, the work that I'm in and I continue to pursue. And our clients, they're not standardized. Our colleagues, they're not standardized. Even, the classmates that we're learning together, they're not standardized. And so as we just through this one class in career development, as we kind of journey through this learning, and we're figuring out, what are the theories, what are the techniques, how do we do this, when is the best time to implement, when do I take my intake, and all these different questions that may come up through the process. It's important that we remember that, one, we're dealing with people. First of all, they're people, right? These are people in front of us. They're not issues, they're not problems. These are people that have things going on in their lives, and we need to deal with them first as people and not as the issues that present or the problems that present, right? So that's the first thing. They're people. But each person is different. And so some of them may have similarities. They may present in similar ways, but they're each going to bring um, their own self to the table, their own self to the conversation. And so we need to be not just able, but we need to be willing to keep that in mind, that we need to look at each person individually and speak specifically to their needs. So even there is a great kind of connection to what does a face-to-face type counseling session offer that perhaps an online or a telecommuting or teleconferencing, telecounseling, or just a free online assessment can't do. There's something very valuable to understanding people individually in those face-to-face moments. However, I think there's a place for the others as well. So I also think about this form of education, how I'm teaching this class. We're running this course. And again, in the light of, in vein of how I homeschool our children, I want to do things different. I want to do things differently. I want to look at things differently. So in most classes like this, you're going to look just at theory, just at technique. And so in this class, we're going to look at something a little bit different, not just in light of, or I should say in place of theory and technique, but in addition to complement. And that's this idea of vocation and calling. Okay. So last several weeks, you've been reading some book. You haven't all told me what book you're reading, but you've been reading a book on vocation and calling. And you've picked a book that is probably the most interesting to you. Perhaps you felt the most, maybe even important to you, the most relevant to where you are and maybe your thought. So some of you may have gone a more church-based, spiritual route. Some of you may have gone a more non-church-based or spiritual route. And there's lots of different books to choose from. So I'm excited to read what you had to say about that. So, but that's a different element. It's a different complement. It's a different approach. It's a different addition to this conversation. But I got to tell you that the more I do this work, not just in the teaching, but in the actual career counseling, career coaching work that I do, I have to tell you, that this vocation and calling component is almost always at the core of the conversation. And you'll look in the books that you're reading this semester. Other than this vocation and calling book, there's very, very little, if any, mentioned in these main theory and technique texts. So I think what we're doing here is very, very important. It's very valuable, and it'll be very helpful because it helps to frame the conversation in ways that has a little bit different spin to it than just kind of the more cut and dry theory and technique or technical approach. Okay, so I'm going to go over the paper. As you know, you have your paper due at the end of this unit. Okay, so you can kind of read the description. So you'll choose a book, which you've done hopefully by now. You read through the book between units 3 and 5, and then here in unit 6 you're writing and you'll submit the paper. It's a 3 to 5 page, not counting your cover page or your references page, analysis paper of the role the ideas of vocation and calling play within the greater context of career development. Okay. So each book that you have to choose from has a good amount of similarity to it as compared to the other choices. So they're all kind of in the similar vein, but they also have distinct approaches to the ideas of vocation and calling. Okay. So here's a couple things that I really want you to keep in mind. Do not approach the writing of this paper without giving your response a serious amount of thought and consideration. When I put in italics analysis, what I'm not looking for, please hear me, I don't want a book review. I know what your books say, okay? I'm very aware, I'm very familiar with the content. Please don't tell me, just like a book report on what the books say. I want an analysis. So as you kind of infuse vocation and calling into what you know so far about career development, about career theories, techniques, I want you to talk about how this fits in, okay? Why vocation and calling are important aspects and topics within the greater conversation of career development, okay? One key thing to keep in mind regarding career counseling development is that the sole purpose of providing career counseling is not simply to help the client find a new job. There is so much more to the process. These ideas of vocation and calling, there's something to consider while making this realization significantly. Because as I mentioned, most of the work that I do, it really kind of centers around this idea of what am I supposed to do? They may not use those words, what is my vocation or what am I called to do? But the questions that they're asking and in the questions that I then would ask in response to get answers from them, what we discover more often than not, if not, I would say the vast majority of the time, okay, is that folks are really looking for, I want a job that really allows me to live out who I am. And I'm not getting to do that right now. But even in those conversations, sometimes what happens is there's a realization that folks, they're just looking at their job perhaps wrongly. And they're thinking it's going to be this fulfilling thing. However, what they're not doing is they're not identifying who they are and how they can make the most of what they're doing. So there's so many different facets to this conversation. And I hope you're finding those connections in your paper, okay? So some special notes to make. This is not an opinion paper, okay? So it's not your anecdotal thoughts. I don't want to hear, I thought this was a great book. Okay, that's not what this is. I don't want to hear, I disagreed with the book. I don't want to hear if I agreed with the book. I want to hear from what you've read, a very kind of, and this is I guess the best way I can put it, almost sterile, okay? Remove yourself from the situation and write as if you are simply just talking about the connections, okay? But have some passion, have some heart behind it. Just don't use I or first person language, okay? I really liked this book, or I read this book. So this would be more of a, for purposes of the vocational calling assessment or analysis paper, such and such book was read. You know, and then you kind of launch into what your paper will be about. And again, it's not opinion, it's not anecdote, it's not, like I mentioned, a book review or a report or a synopsis. This is an academic paper focused on critical thinking and analysis. So if you go back up, you'll notice that there's the Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And really what we're looking at is critical analysis and critical thinking, which these are at the top levels of this, you know, or toward the top anyway, of of the triangle, okay? So the report, the synopsis, the kind of regurgitation of what was read, those are lower level. So we're really going after higher level thinking. Okay, so be very academic in this approach to how you write the paper. Okay, so while it is important to think about how the content of the book will impact the work that you might do in this field, make sure to leave out, as I mentioned, personal opinion or thoughts of how you personally might incorporate the ideas of vocation and calling into your work. So again, you're not writing about how, when I'm working with clients, I think that I would do this. Again, this is a critical thought analysis paper, okay? Not specifically about you, but about the content and how it connects to the greater field of career development. Okay, hope that makes sense. If you have questions, of course, email me or call me. You are analyzing how vocation and calling fit into the greater theoretical framework. Okay, all right. So in addition to referencing your book of choice, you must have at least 2 peer-reviewed journal articles and or books that must be cited. So you could use, in fact, I would encourage you to use some of the books that we've read so far in the class, you know, the Anderson Van Hee or the Liptak text, or you've also got some great references as far as journal articles that we've read so far in the class as well, okay? Obviously, Wikipedia, kind of Popular Press, Yahoo, People Magazine, things like that are not acceptable, okay? Okay, so let's see, I should mention you can include them in there, but they're not counted towards the requirement of the 2 additional sources in addition to the vocation and calling book that you're reading, okay? Let's see. If appropriate sources are not referenced, assignments will receive a grade reduction, okay? Paper should be written in APA format, including a running head, cover page, and references page. And this is important too. Papers totaling over 5 pages will receive a reduction in grade, as will papers under 3 pages, okay? So it's due the end of this unit, Unit 6, by midnight, so a week from tomorrow it's due. It's worth 15 points. The other thing to mention is you do have a grading rubric, okay? So you need to include the grading rubric, which I will upload into Sakai. I'll upload a Word document version, copy and paste that, and put that at the end of your paper, okay? It must be in your paper or you'll receive a 1-point deduction. What you have to do then is there's available points, and then you give yourself a score. So if it's an incomplete rubric, you still receive a 1-point deduction, okay? Again, if you have questions, let me know. So that's the paper. Have fun with it. Be passionate and excited about it. Make sure to include the rubric, cover page, references page. And if you have questions, if I can be clear on something, email me, call me, come by the office if you're on campus. Have fun with it, and I look forward to reading these papers.